Okay, so I'm going to do a few things. I do want to see, I'm going to start with that Nepari trainer that I have. And then we'll see, there's Kendra, great, okay. I'll actually start with WebKnossos then. Let me just get that pulled up. I'm going to do WebKnossos first, just because I wanted to show a little bit of ink labeling in that. Let me get that pulled up here, 1 second. We'll do 4424, great. Okay, we don't have WebKnossos available yet to everybody. We're trying to figure out how to get this available, like our hosted instance of it, but it is a tool that you can run locally. It's an open source tool. WebKnossos also has a paid version. We use the open source version, and we run it through a Docker script hosted on the data server. So we haven't yet figured out an easy way to make this available to people in terms of like user management and that. It's somewhat difficult to do, but we're trying to figure that out so we can open this up to everyone. But in the meantime, it's really, really, really easy if you wanted to use this to host it on your own computer. Building it is as simple as literally just running this Docker compose, and then it just starts a local web server. So it's kind of nice. I have a version on my own, and then because it's open source, obviously everything's here. If you wanted to build upon it, you could. We use it. We have an annotation team that uses it for doing both file labeling and then also doing ink labeling in 3D. So I'm going to do a little bit of ink labeling in 3D today. This one I don't believe has 3D predictions, so let me grab one that does. Just a second here. I think I'll take, let's see, I want to do 6. I'm just working on finding one quick that has all of the things that I need. That one just says that, and this one has ink labels, great, okay. So let's do that one. This one has both ink labels loaded, which you can use kind of as a starting point, and then it also has, somewhere it has 3D ink predictions on it, but we'll just do it from the ink labels as a starting point. When I do this, I minimize most of these other views because you don't need them. Well, you need them, but they're not that big. So I'll just line up these. When you're zoomed really far out, it obviously goes through a number of these. So I'll just start. I'm going to try to pick, I'm on 1321 right now. I'll try to do a couple letters, just kind of from different areas. First, what I want to do is just hide the ink labels and see if I can find a good starting spot. Every time I annotate ink, I have to like get reused to it. There we go. All right, let's just start here. It's a little bit warped, but it should work. Create an annotation. This is scroll 1. The segment is 1321, I think. Let's zoom out. Yeah, 1321. So I'll start with an easy one, just because it takes a little bit every time I do ink labeling to kind of recenter myself in what I'm actually looking at. When I annotate, I try to use all 3 views. This is really the strong point of using WebKnossos for this task, is that you can look at all 3 views. And in my opinion, at least most of the time, I actually think Crackle is easier to see than the other ones. The issue is you can't really like it takes forever to annotate in YZ or XZ. So I do like the primary annotation part in the Z, but then I look at the other views to kind of see where I'm at. I'm just going to make my brush a little bit smaller here. That's probably too small. Alright. So all I'm going to do is just annotate just this one here, and hopefully it will fill it right. Okay, so I'm just getting the crackle. This one is, again, a pretty easy one to do, but we'll show easy ones, and then I'll end up on a hard one here in a little bit. And I gotta hide that texture. So we're gonna do that. Particle size, pattern opacity 0. There we go. And I'm just focusing here on getting all of the actual crackle parts. I'll finish this letter. I'll probably do 2 letters today, and then I'll show another one, which is that like an arc trainer that I've been talking about. WebKnossos has the ability to do this like fill in if you close one of your polys, which is kind of nice. It also can be a little bit problematic if you didn't intend for it to do so. And it also only does it like for small ones, so it's kind of nice, kind of annoying at the same time. So keep going through here. I try to do one layer at a time if I can. It's because at least this is my thought, right? The whole area includes a number of areas that aren't actually ink. You know, if we label the entire letter, we're also telling the model that like if I mark this, let me just say over here. I mean, I know this is an alpha, but if I carry this through and I mark it all the way through like this, I'm telling the model that this is ink, and I mean it is ink, right? We know that there's a letter there, but the model doesn't know what a letter is. So if we're saying that's ink, then it's going to create a feature that says that's ink. And my thought, and our thought is like that. Perhaps if we are more specific about what we show the model, that it will learn the features better. And additionally, like when you label stuff that isn't like visible ink, say it's just on the surface, you're also training the model implicitly to learn the surface of the papyrus, and the surfaces from scroll to scroll are different, and so maybe that's part of why we have trouble generalizing. We're not exactly sure. I mean, this is kind of just an experiment to see, like, yeah, you're right. The kind of experiment to see, like, hey, if we make like hyper accurate 3D labels of only exactly the papyrus, will the model learn better and generalize better? I think the answer to that is yes, but I don't know for sure. And we don't have a lot of super specific labels like this. Like it takes, as you can see, it takes a very long time to label like this. So the data set of letters that are this accurate is extremely low. I think I've done like 30 or 40 or something of them, but it's not that much. I don't think it would take that much if we had a fair bit of really accurate ones like this. I think what we'll do is I'm going to finish up this area, and then I'm going to move down like 4 layers and label it again. And then I'll use the extrapolate tool. too. Like a lot of times it's hard to tell where this ends and where it starts, right? Most of the time, these views over here are helpful for that kind of thing. So I've labeled here. We can figure out how high it goes. You know, if we go all the way, if I send this here, if you see this tiny little piece right here, I'm not going to label this yet because I want to use my extrapolate tool. But you can see that it goes for quite a ways longer than you might expect. And it's usually a good way to figure out, like, where do I stop and where do I start. I'm going to go a couple layers down here, though, and I'm going to use my extrapolate tool and see if I can get it to work well. So I labeled two layers back. Now if I label this one in full, I should be able to hit V, and it'll extrude that segmentation I did using some kind of like thresholding or something like that. I'm not exactly sure how the interpolate function in WebKnossos works, like on the back end, but from what I've used, it seems to work pretty well. I'm just going to keep going along here for a bit. And I want to label as much as I can before I hit the interpolate tool, because if I hit it right now, I can't hit it again. Like, I can't label a little bit more on the same layer and hit it again. I can only hit it once on a layer, and I've got to move at least 2 layers away to use it again. So I want to make sure I get as much as I can on this first one. And it's kind of ambiguous when you go through these, like where does it start and stop, but I label the obvious stuff first, and then I'll zoom out a fair bit and see if it's lining up with like what I expect. So let's get this here, and that's probably fine. So I'll hit interpolate, and we'll see how it does. So it did a reasonable job. We've still got some miss, but it interpolated between 32 and 28. So it's not bad. A lot of it definitely a little bit up here. It didn't get to the top because I didn't have anything labeled up here down at layer 28. So I'll have to kind of do that again. So I'll go down to layer 28 here. 29 maybe. 28. Some of the hardest spots are the fibers, obviously, because they look a lot like ink in most places, especially on these segments that are this like standardized segment. The ink, the intensity between like a couple of them changes quite a bit, and it becomes a lot less obvious. So sharp corners out like this, and then sometimes literally just zooming out. And just kind of spinning through the layers a few times to try to see like how it's actually like moving through the papyrus. Oh, this was my test up here. I need to erase that. It interpolated when I wrote that little thing just to show the brush. Alright, so this is where I was going, it's right here. I use a pretty small brush when I do this. I'm trying to be, again, like as specific as I can be. It's a little bit difficult again, but like, you know, if we're gonna make super accurate labels, we might as well spend the time and do it the right way the first time. Otherwise, I always have to like go away from this letter. At some point here, what I'll do is I'll do some of this letter, and then I'm going to move to a different one. So I filled this in up here. I can probably then come to like this layer and extrapolate it again. And I'm just looking in the other views to kind of see what I'm looking at here. You can see kind of where I have some of my annotations. They're spaced, but I'm trying to connect the two layers that have kind of spaced out here. So if I hit V here, it should interpolate reasonably well, which it did. Okay, great. And I'm just going to clean that up a bit, take this all the way around. This is what this is here is like one of those like sort of like C cupping things. And so they're not flat, you know, they don't it's not like they exist only on one layer, they slowly like cup up, and so you can see that kind of like fill in as we get higher up or lower. And it's still here. This is really thick ink that you can actually see in these slices quite well. This is probably one of the easier letters to see out of all of them. The hard part here is where is this fiber, where isn't it? Usually, you can see them reasonably well here, but that's not necessarily the case. This little like floaty blur thing, that's the horizontal fiber. It's very difficult to see, but to me, the fiber ends like right here, and so this little like kind of bent up part is likely the continuation of a piece of crackle, so I'm going to mark it. It's tough to say in a lot of areas like what is fiber specifically, like where is the delineation point between like a piece of ink that's next to or on a fiber and not. But I think this one is. Yeah, this definitely is. Here I don't want to fill that, so I hope it doesn't. Good. I'm going to try the interpolation tool on this little piece. Nice, did pretty good. So that's I think probably the easier way to do it is to pick a piece and then interpolate just that at a time. So if I go a few layers down on that, interpolate. Where was the last thing? To that, and then we can go to like here. Try it again. Oh yeah, there you go. So it works pretty well if you keep it focused. So let's say this one, and then if I go to like here. Yeah, that worked quite well. This is insanely thick crackle. So let's finish this off, and then I'll try my interpolation tool on the next one down. Yeah, that looks great. Okay. So let's just zoom out and kind of see if I've got my boundaries or if I see anything obvious here. I think I've got my boundaries set pretty good. I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anything like to the left before I zoom in again. And I don't think that I really am. This letter continues out to like here, it seems. Let's call it here. So I'll label a few. These are like the top like tips of the crackle. As it curls up, it becomes like a really sharp cupping like C like that. Which is what makes these like really harsh lines. We don't have like a public WebKnossos front yet. So we host a version of we host the open source version on our file server, and right now it's mostly for annotators, but for our annotation team. But we're working on getting it opened up to everyone else. And then if you want to, it's really easy to build it from a Docker container. So there's an open source repository, which I'll send a link to right now. And then you just do this Docker compose. And then if you want to add anything, like once if you have this running locally, if you want to add a ZAR, it's as easy as going to data sets and just like add data set, and then you can paste a link to the ZAR from the file server, and it will just serve that for you. But it is something that we're like working on getting made public. The issue is just the permissions to the data set, because we have our annotation team doing annotations, and then if we want to make it public, we're going to want a way that like if you make an annotation, other people can edit it, or also just the fact that like right now it's not clear exactly how to scale WebKnossos, at least from the Docker Compose version. Right now our data server is not really set up to run a WebKnossos thing that serves everyone. Even with just our annotation team on it, we end up freezing up the WebKnossos front, and it locks up even with a small annotation team. So until we can figure that out, we can't really like serve it to everyone. But I really want to, because it is by far the easiest way to like look at segments and get annotating them quickly. And it would be great to be able to just like share this. If someone's like, hey, I want to get started in the project. Where do I start? And just send them a link and just say, well, you can start annotating, here you go. And someone could start doing that immediately, rather than having to try to figure out, what Python packages do I have to install to be able to run any annotation that we have, or how do I even install a Python package? For a lot of people, that's enough of like a barrier where maybe someone would have been able to contribute to the project, now isn't. Let's go to here. Let's see how the interpolation shows. Reasonably well. Yeah. Yep. I can save this now. So I can export this as a. It's not without the like paid version. It's not necessarily the easiest thing to do. Rather, it's easy. But you have to set up a thing called jobs, and then you can download the TIFF. If you have this set up locally, all you need to do is configure it to run export jobs. It's not that difficult, but we don't have ours set up yet. Also, you can access it. They have a Python API, which works very well. So you could like do these, right? If you hosted this publicly, or if you hosted this like rather remotely, you could run these, and then you could download them with Python, and then you could run like a training through the data that is just hosted in your local version of WebKnossos. But also you can just download them as ZAR. That you don't need an export job for. Internally, all WebKnossos segments are ZARs. There used to be a format called WKW, which was WebKnossos, like, I don't know, WebKnossos something. But they are now all just czars, which is great. You can, because you can just annotate them and then you instantly have a 3D czar right away. It's awesome. Yeah, you have to get your training workflow set up to take czars then, but that's not that hard. I'm going to grab the edge of this quick. But you can see how this takes forever. Annotating it in 3D, and this specific in 3D is extremely tedious. But it looks very nice when you have it done. I'm just kind of scrubbing through the layers now to see like where on this left side here do I have anything left that I haven't marked. Trying to finish one side at a time. It becomes really easy to like jump around and then miss like little parts of the letter that you had on one layer or a different layer, and now you've missed one. So it's hard to, it's kind of hard to do, but just take some time. And the edge of this one obviously is not easy to delineate because it turns into a fiber. To me, it ends like there, right about here. And so I'm going to call it there. You could argue that it goes a little bit further, but I'm going to call that one good there. And then I'm just trying to stay within like somewhere between like layer 20 and 40. That doesn't hold true all the time. I'll show in a second here towards the top of one of them, how you can easily tell, like, no, my mic just turned off. Or maybe it did. Let's see. Yeah, it did. There we go. I think I'm back now. Hopefully. My mic turned off for some reason. Yeah, how do I decide which letters look good to annotate? Kind of hard, right? What happens to me a lot is I'll start a letter, and then after a little while of annotating it, I'll just realize like I can't, I just can't figure it out, you know? Like, let's see one that might be considered difficult. This one's very thin. So like if I were coming through here, initially I would have seen this, right? And I would have said, oh, that's a pretty good crackle right there. And you can kind of see it carry through if you look at this other view here. Just look for like the cupping. So there's some up here too. But the problem is like it ends at some point. I mean, the crackle's still kind of here. But it's likely that if I were to try to annotate this one, especially without any letters around it, that I'm going to start just kind of picking stuff up. You don't need them to be this good. This is crazy good. You don't need the crackle to be this like pronounced, right? But usually what I'll do is like I'll start annotating one, and then if I just can't get a feel for like where it is or its boundaries at least, like where it starts and stops. After like trying to annotate it for a while, so like maybe this one, like if I go in this one, let's find out if I could even do that. So I know it's here. I'm on layer 32, which is great. I know it's here. So let's go up a little ways, staying right around 32. Let's see if we can. So we've got a little bit here, right here, which you can see in this view as well. So I know that this is Crackle. Let's see if I can get a boundary like at all of where it starts and stops. And then also I can pull up my labels and see what they say. So that's how someone labeled it. Now the labels like aren't, these are the labels that are in the detection repository that was used to train the grand prize model. And so they're not like, they're good in certain areas, but they're not, you can't take them as like the ground truth. You know, this doesn't necessarily mean just because somebody labeled this as an alpha or a tau or something like that. It doesn't mean they were right. You know, there was a fair bit of labels being applied in the grand prize model, and so it was robust to labels that were not good. And in certain areas, the ones that are included there aren't very good. They're as good as you could have reasonably expected at the time, but they're not, like, you can't take them as gospel. I'm going to see if I can establish any kind of bounds on this right now. I'm going to zoom out a little bit and see if I can find. I know this is at the bottom of that alpha, so like it should go up to like about here if it does. I would think this. But again, you can see like I'm already having a difficult time finding the boundaries of this letter, which you really have to have. Like you have to have boundaries for a letter to stay. Yeah, this too. So let's say I'm on 31. I'm going to label this as 32. To stay like focused, you know, if you don't have like the idea of like the shape of the letter. So I think that this is roughly here. And then, yeah, here we go. Here's some better stuff as we get up. So I know that like this is right down through here. Let's see if I can find the other side of it. So that alone is the letter. That could be like the leg of something so far, but definitely down here. So I think this is an alpha. I think it goes up here. So I could label this one. This wouldn't be one that I would start with though. Like, it's definitely labelable. And if I were to take this one as like a training sample, I wouldn't take the whole thing. You know, I would crop out. Like I would write. I would label everything that I think I can reasonably label, and then I would just crop this letter to like that part only. And then, as you do that a few times, your model's going to get better at seeing it and will help you annotate it later. To start with, this is pretty difficult, and I don't know that this label is it's reasonably accurate. So, or at least what I see so far. I think it's just actually more like the alpha does like this. I don't think that it does this swooping L here. So again, it's a spot where like I don't know that I would take it as gospel, although there is Crackle here for sure, so it might. So that's a hard one. But I guess that's really the gist of it, though, Kendra, is like try to find one where you can see, here you can see the foot for sure. That like you actually can establish a shape, I think that this letter does this right here. Like I think this is the letter. Something along those lines. But if you're looking at it and you can't see any boundary and you only have like a couple crackles to base it off of, it's probably not a good one to start from. And I always try to start from something easy like this one when I first start annotating again, because even if I don't do the whole one, like say this isn't necessarily a letter that I need for my training samples, Maybe like at the start of when I'm going to be annotating for that like session, it helps to go back and label something easier, just because it's obviously kind of an arbitrary decision what is and what isn't Crackle in a lot of places. And so you gotta get like a feel for it again, like every time I do it, I've gotta get a feel for like, okay, what does Crackle actually look like every time I annotate. It's not like as easy as like I leave and then come back and I'm immediately able to annotate a really difficult letter, like the one left is this one that we were just doing. So sometimes it might help to just come in and like pick up on an easier one, and just label like maybe something like this, maybe not as much, but something easier, something like clear Crackle to get like a feel for what you're looking for, and especially like panning through the layers like this, just kind of see like what does it look like as we flow through the layers, because like on its own, this doesn't necessarily look like Crackle, but it certainly is, and you can see it. This letter is like cupping, so again, remember this is a C. And so like as we go down, we're getting through towards like the bottom of that C, and then the sides of it becomes this really thin, like bright line. And this whole piece here is like a continuing part of this original Crackle. And this is like a big part of where these side views help, Usually when you look at it inside, you can see these quite clearly. Like every kind of big label you just need context for. So yeah, I try to stick with letters. If I'm going to do a harder letter, it'll be one that is nearby, an easier one, or one that I've annotated already too. That's another good thing to do. Like if you can establish some kind of row and column consistency, that helps a ton. Like if I'm trying to annotate this letter up here, and I'm putting ink down here, I'm probably not in the right spot, because although theoretically possible, and on scrolls like there are occasionally intercolumn markings, this would be a pretty unlikely spot for Crackle. And so something like this that maybe looks like Crackle when you're in a letter, I mean, this looks like it maybe could be, right? At least similar enough, but we're well in the intercolumn area, so it probably is not Crackle. Similarly, like with something like this, right here. So if you can stay kind of like within the bounds of your letter, and then the bounds of your row, and then also the column. Like if I'm annotating here, this is certainly an intercolumn area. There shouldn't be anything here. There might be, again, intercolumn markings do exist in Herculaneum scrolls, but they're not super, like they're common in all the scrolls, right? But they don't occur like on every row and in every column. So it's more likely than not that if you're annotating over here, you're out of bounds, And then once you establish like what your letter is, and you shouldn't take it as like, again, you shouldn't take your assumption of what the letter is as the truth, because more often than not, what you think the letter isn't actually the letter, and you'll end up trying to force it. Like if I'm over here and I think this isn't how, but if I thought it was and it actually was a pie, and I'm just ignoring obvious things down here because I thought it was a tau, that would be problematic. So you should use the information you have in terms of like, if I've made 3/4 of a tau, and I have a letter over here and a marking over here, again, probably not the right spot, but you shouldn't take that as like the only information. You kind of got to take everything together. And you can set the opacity down on these two if you want, but I try to like find a letter without the I find like a place to start usually with the labels in terms of like getting myself centered in an area, but then I like to turn them off and not really use them for annotation for most of the time. Let's do like a medium letter though. And now towards the bottom here, there's a couple that are okay. And I try to stay away from something like this. Like I wouldn't try to label this. This is, you can see in the right view there, this segment is insanely warped right here. just look at like how it curves and how the interpolation artifacts are showing up on the right side. Like this is not a good spot to label. So I try to avoid stuff like that. We don't have like, especially in our auto segmentations, like we don't get stuff quite like that anymore. And so there's not really a purpose, in my opinion, in labeling that. It's not really that common. So I try to avoid that kind of thing because it's really confusing. Like if you're looking at this, there's a good crackle over here, but then what happens over here? And how do you annotate that? How do you tell, like there's crackle right here, but where does it go from there? Where does it stop? So I try to avoid that. I'm going to just find it as somewhat decent one quick here. Alright, here's one that's okay. We'll do this one. Perfect. So this one's a little bit harder to see than the other one, but still reasonable. Let's go to about like 32 and try to see. So this is a good segmented one right here. Most of it exists on our top layer that we would expect it to. So I'll label a little bit of this one too, and then I'll go to the Napari one and just kind of show that one a little bit. I'm going to try to just focus on a small area with this one and just finish out this little area right here. What's that? Yeah. So I'm trying to see in these other views, like, do I see this as a fiber or a continuation of the crackle? I think the bottom of this here is the crackle, but I don't think that this is. I think this is a fiber. So I'll mark this up. And I'm just going to label this like first one kind of densely, and then use my interpolation tool after that. And even though I'm focusing on this one layer, what I'm doing is I'm just panning through the slices to see if what I'm marking is crackle. I'm not annotating on the other ones quite yet. I'm just using the information from the layer above and below it to see if I've made annotations on stuff that actually is crackle. So I think I have so far, so I'm going to go down a few layers. I know this is. This is. I know this one is. And this. In some cases, I might mark this entire thing in here. I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that. I'm just not doing it yet. So we know that this and this are. Expand that a little bit. All right, I'm going to do my interpolation and we'll see how that did. So reasonably well. But it missed this here. So we've got to fill that in a little bit. as we go through here, we can see that this part that was only this little like guy here becomes a fully composed piece of Fractal. So let's see this later. Excuse me. I just loaded this for a second. Nope, it is ZAR. WebKnossos takes ZARs. So you turn them into an OME ZAR. You can either use the WebKnossos CLI, or you can have WebKnossos do it, or you can make the ZAR rather first and just import it into WebKnossos. Up to you really how you do it. But also again, if you have WebKnossos instances, well, we don't have all the ZARs on the data server yet, so that's something I've got to work on too. Is for scroll one, we don't have all the segments in ZAR format hosted on the data server yet, and so I've got to get those updated. But once I do, turn shift stack to ZAR. Okay, but not all volumes ZAR. I'm not sure what do you mean by not volumes ZAR. Oh, right. Yes, correct. This is not a scroll volume ZAR. This is, you just take we just ran scroll OME on a TIFF stack. I think that this is still Fractal, so I'm actually going to end up marking this. I wasn't sure before if this entire spot here was, but I think at least this part is. This is what it is. I need to clean that up a little bit. But like I said, you can also do this with you don't have to turn it into ZAR to scroll OME. You can WebKnossos has a Python package, and you can just use like WK. WebKnossos CLI. They have documentation here for it. Yeah, that's the hard part, right? Yeah. So for this one, it's not super difficult in that you can take PPM because this is a segment that was created with PPM. So you can use the PPM as it is, and then that will give you for each pixel of the UV map what its actual 3D coordinate is, and then you would know that like if this volume shape for the annotation and the volume shape for the segment line, you would basically just go like PPM point to point. We would go like layer 29 would be 2 back on the normal from whatever the UV points 3D coordinate is, and you just kind of have to do the math there. There's a pretty good script that James Darby wrote that can do that for you. Come on, there it is. James Darby. Instance 2. No, not instance mesh. Labels 2, 3. So you can use this, and if you have a PPM this will map whatever your layers are to the 3D volume, and then create the 3D volume with the same shape as like scroll 1 or whatever. And then just remap that right to 3D. So what you have to do, so say you label these in WebKnossos, is you would have to take your ZAR. So you download your ZAR, and then you would slice your ZAR along the Z level, and then from there you would have layer like 31, 32, 33, and you would just place those in the layers folder here along with PPM. And then you call those like whatever your overlay name that you'd like it to be is, and that will automatically do the rest for you. It works pretty fast. I use this to make my 3D ink volume model, and I also used it to make my fiber models, this script specifically. So anything you have a PPM for, you can do that. Now, if you don't have a PPM, it becomes a little bit more difficult. If you have an auto segmentation, you can use the TIFF XYZ, which at like each point, so the TIFF X, or X.TIFF, Y.TIFF, Z.TIFF, all of that is populated with the 3 coordinates that actually exist in the volume. So say you have an auto segmentation, you just, if you want the X coordinate, you just look at X.TIFF at that specific spot, and it will tell you where that coordinate is. So it's kind of like a PPM, but in 3 parts. If you have an OBJ, you could do the same thing, but you need your texture coordinates, which would be VTs. So you can do it from an OBJ as well. So you got a couple ways to do it. If you have a PPM though, which you have for all the scroll 1 ones, I would probably use this. If you don't have a PPM, you might need to get a little bit creative. But it's not impossible. So I'm going to do a little bit more of this one, and then let's see. I'll probably do the Napari trainer for a second, just to kind of show how that works. Kendra, is there anything like specific on here as well that like you maybe are like a little bit ambiguous on, like you're not sure exactly like where to mark and where not to mark? Here's actually another good like example of like how high that crackle can go. So see like this piece that comes off right here. Like this is all crackle. That's a huge piece, and so as we get down here, like it doesn't really look like it would be just a 2D plane, but it is. Picking clear letters, yeah. I mean, yeah, it helps. Like a letter like this, obviously, is pretty clear to me, at least. I'm not sure, like, if this is a clear letter to you or not, or like if I can maybe like help describe what I'm seeing. But it can be a challenge. Yeah, which one are you in? Let me pull that one up. I think you're in, I don't remember. Do you remember the name of the one that you're in? I think it's 96. I'm pretty sure. Let's see if I can figure out what I'm doing. Oh, you are in 1321. So, yeah, you are in that one. I'm not really sure exactly where you are, though, right now. Let me see. Okay, yeah, you are. Yours is 1321. So this is the same one that you're in right now. It's just maybe I just found one that was by luck just a little bit easier to see. It's towards the bottom is where I found it, somewhere around like here. There's a few down here though in 1321 that are quite good. There's some good letter here. Let's see if I can find another couple ones. You have to be kind of picky though, right? It takes some time to find a good one, and then you don't want to settle like right away. You don't want to take too long looking, but this is also a good example here of stuff that looks like crackle but it isn't. At least most of the time it's not. This kind of like, I don't know, like sea spray like stuff. This most of the time actually isn't crackle, but it is very disorienting because the letters actually, I think right here, there is some crackle there. But yeah, on this one there's, I know there's an intercolumn space somewhere to the left here. But this file has a fair bit of good ones. I like 1321 quite a bit. I think this is one of the better segmentations. But it isn't as easy as certain areas are on other ones. But all of them have spots that are easy and spots that aren't. This is an okay letter. At least I can get it like, they're usually somewhere around like 4 fibers tall. So if I can see the full height of the letter, usually I'll annotate one like that. I want to be able to see like the full height or maybe the full width of the letter before I decide to start on that one. This would be quite a hard one right here, where I get a couple clear crackle, but just a few, a very, very, very small amount. This would be a very hard letter to annotate. It could be done, but it's likely that you'll probably make some mistakes. I just my mic. For some reason, my mic does not. My mic doesn't want to stay on. Yeah. So some of those like maybe skip those. Like don't jump to the first crackles you see, because I think you'll just have trouble with it. Like if you don't have a reasonable amount, or at least another letter around it somewhere. Let's see if I can find another good one. So let's pull up the letter. That might be just in the intercolumn area. Yeah, look at that. So I'm over here looking for ink, and I'm in the intercolumn area. So anything I would have found down here, there wouldn't have been anything there. We got a warp there, so we'll skip that. So that warping is this thing right here, and again you can see it in this other view. You see how like the papyrus like goes really like wavy, and it's not like normal wavy either. Like it looks warped. So again, I try to skip those. I don't really. It's already hard enough to annotate ink. Don't really need to make it harder. There we go. There's something right there. So here's another decent one. I can see at least most of the way that it goes. I can see that it goes down to the right a little ways. Kind of looks like an alpha, but this one's okay. It's kind of hard, but reasonable. At least for a decent chunk of it. And you don't have to, like, if you can't annotate after a little while, like say you start a letter, right? and you just hit a spot with it where like you feel like you're just hallucinating stuff, just move to a different letter. You don't have to. It's not like if you commit to this letter, like you've got to sit on this letter until you can see a full Greek letter. Like you can move on from this letter and maybe just start on the one next to it, for a little bit, and then annotate that for a little bit, and then come back to this one. I do that quite a bit because like the longer you stare in one spot, the more you're going to start hallucinating. It happens to literally anyone who annotates. It happens to the pathologists as well when they're even doing like actual like real unrolled scrolls. It happens to anyone who stares at something that has a high degree of ambiguity for a very long time. You start seeing things where maybe there isn't things, or you start questioning your ability to see things. And so sometimes just like zooming out, walking away for a little bit, picking a different letter. Here's another decent letter right here that we can see the bounds of pretty well. I would recommend kind of doing that at least, maybe annotating, say you pick like 3 easy letters, and you just kind of, not maybe easy, but you pick 3 letters, and then from those 3 letters, you start on one, and you annotate until you feel like you are no longer confident. Here's another nice spot. Until you feel like you're no longer confident in anything that you're marking. And then just move to a different one. And it's pretty likely that when you move to this other one, you're going to see stuff that you didn't see the last time you were annotating it. Say like you're just kind of round-robining them. When you come back to that letter, you'll probably immediately notice something that you missed the last time. And you do the same thing here. You annotate for a little while, until you're just not seeing it anymore. Go to a different one again. When you go to that other one, you're going to probably have the same thing happen. I like to try to stick somewhere, maybe with a row or something, so that it's easy to jump back and forth. But you don't have to stick within a row or a column. You can spread them out more. But it's fun. I really like annotating ink. It's tedious, but like when you get one annotated well, and then you zoom out and you see a whole like row of Greek letters or something like that, it's really cool. Or on the flip side, when you're annotating for a while and it's like the middle of the night and you haven't slept in like 3 days, and then you zoom out and you just see a giant like block of nothing. That happens to me. That's when you know maybe it's time to like take a walk or get some better sleep or something. That happened to me a ton early on in annotating, where I would just would have something going and I would just lose it. I just couldn't. Just couldn't annotate for like a day or two. So it's tough. It's really hard work. So let's see. I'll pull up that Napari trainer for a little bit. We'll take a look at that. Yeah, of course. And also like if you need help like at any point, or you're a little confused on something, like just shoot me a message, and I'm happy to do a call or anything. Just to kind of go over it, right? Like I'm available. I'm always working on scrolls, so if you want a hand or just a second eye, feel free to hit me up. Activate my Napari environment. Community unlock. Oops. So this is installed in the. Actually, I don't think I have it in that one yet. Hold on here. I've got to figure out. I don't know if I don't think I've purged that yet. I thought I did. This is why you don't call a branch name something 20 letters long, because now I've got to try to type that. Man. Oh, I missed. No. Oh, it's some proofreader slash party trainer. Yeah, that's not a good branch name, by the way. If you have any ideas about naming something like that, avoid that. That is a mistake. I'll make this part of the Vesuvius package. Just as soon as I'm done here. I thought I had done it already, but apparently I missed a step. But when I do put it in there, it just runs with this Vesuvius and a party trainer. I need to figure out why now I'm having to choose this. Why don't I just run it manually? Just a moment here. Okay then. That's not when that worked. I constantly have, and I'm sure anybody else who uses any kind of GUI stuff, I constantly have issues with cute, or Qt. And that, like, it just seems that no matter how many times I install it, or where I install it, or how many environments I configure it fresh, I always have problems with launching Qt-based applications. It's just every time. Not really sure why, but that's what we have right now. So I need to, I think I have it right in this environment, in the party environment, but this one doesn't have Torch, so I just need to install a couple things in here and then we can get started. I think that's all I need. I don't know if I need 2 more. Watch now though, this will as soon as I get these installed, I'll end up with the same error. Oh yeah, no. Yep. All right. Well, we'll skip that for now. We'll do a little more labeling, and I'll save that one for another time. I'll make a video on it. Is what I'll do, and then I'll just post it to the Discord after I get it integrated into Vesuvius Python. I had it there. And then I must have probably ran into a similar issue. Pull it out for a second. But I'll make sure that I can get that all set up properly in the front end so that we don't run into the same issues again. I'm going to pull up my annotation that I started, and I'm just going to finish that one of those letters. So I need to find... this one, I think, right here. Open. Perfect. Yeah, this is the one starting out. So I'll just do this one for a little bit longer. Finish out this letter. Figure I'll do this instead of try to troubleshoot Qt stuff on the office hours for however long that might actually take. I'm going to do the same thing I was doing before, where I try to pick a small area and then use my interpolation tool to go between like maybe 4 or 5 layers or something like that. I know there are some other ways to do this, you can like extrude annotations and stuff, but I'm not really familiar with those yet, and to me this just works well enough. I mean, if you find a different workflow that works for you, by all means use it, but this is the way that I know how to do it. So let's go down, or let's go up 2. Yeah, I've thought about using it again. So I did a lot of labeling in a program called Dragonfly 3D, which has similarly a 3D brush that you can threshold. And I liked it quite a lot. So I'm sure that brush can be super helpful. The only problem that I ever have with the 3D brush is that it can get you in trouble, you know? And I ran into this when I was annotating fibers quite a bit, and this was when I was annotating them volumetrically like this. If you're not careful, it can mark stuff that you didn't intend to mark, or miss areas. And what I found, other than so it can be really helpful when I was using it in the right areas, but when I was trying to be over aggressive with it, sometimes I found that the cleanup from the mistakes that I made with the 3D brush ended up taking as long as it would have had I just annotated in the first place. Yeah, if you just pick 1 through 5, that's probably really helpful. That sounds like a good use case for it. If you only pick a couple layers and you're just very focused with it, it could probably be really nice. That's how I used it in Dragonfly mostly. I tried to use it bigger, because obviously annotating is at times very tedious. So you try to find ways to, or I would try to find ways to speed it up, but it just mostly turned out every time I tried to speed it up that I was just creating more work for myself later. If I tried to speed it up too much, the 1 through 5 layers is probably a very effective limit on it. This is obviously another area where it becomes kind of ambiguous where this ends or not, right? I'm taking this like kind of like, if you see this like kind of lighter thing here as the edge of this crackle, because we can see it quite clearly here. So I'm going to follow this one down as long as I can kind of maintain this clear edge. It's probably here. It's probably as far as I can go with it. Then I know that this I can go at least a little bit further with. That's probably the extent of as far as I can bring that. The other thing I've noticed in WebKnossos is this is just kind of a, these crosshairs sometimes really get in the way of what I'm seeing. So occasionally I'll like put them off to the side and just like get them out of the way, just to kind of like reduce the amount of noise that you have in like your visual field, because there's obviously already a lot of it on the actual surface of the papyrus. So I try to just get at least as best as I can some of that noise out of the way if I'm having trouble. Depends kind of like if I'm, sometimes it doesn't bother me, sometimes it does, especially if I'm in a hard spot, it tends to bother me quite a bit. This out a little bit more. And I think that this stuff is as well. It's always hard to tell with some of this like more like, I don't know, ghosty looking stuff, like is it or isn't it crackle? It's not always immediately obvious. I tend to err on the side of like if it's a round crackle that it likely also is, especially if it's got like sharp edges. Yeah, so this stuff that like when you're close in, it's ambiguous whether or not like some of this stuff in here is crackle. When you zoom out, it becomes a lot more obvious. And that's kind of, every once in a while it's helpful to do that. Even though you can't really annotate from that far out, like kind of helps like resolve some of the questions about like where the letter or the crackles start to end. And already now that I've gone a little bit away from this, when I was here earlier, I didn't mark this edge, but yeah, this whole edge is part of it, probably this whole piece here, actually. but this is another example of like sometimes when you're like in it on the same piece for a while, you just kind of like lose track of like what it is that you're annotating anymore, and how it can be helpful to just zoom out, go somewhere else for a little while, and then come back to it. Which I'll probably do it again in just a second. I know that this is call that whole piece. Let's go here now. And again, I know that I'm not done. I know that I'm not done over there, right? But I just am going to go somewhere else for a little bit. And then come back to it afterwards. Here. So you doing? How you doing? Yeah. You. Good. And I've talked to you a little while. I mean, I haven't had office hours until this week, though. So it's been a bit. Doing well. Did you, I still have to write to it. Eric sent me a copy of the book. I saw you got a nice little reference in the back, which is great. It's awesome. I haven't read it yet, though. I'm hoping I can get to it here in the next couple weeks. It's not super long. You got it today. Cool. Yeah, it's a cool book. I mean, at least like the, I haven't read it yet, obviously, but like the title, or the cover looks awesome, and then obviously the content is great, at least for us. I'm hoping I can get it read next week, because it doesn't look that long, so I should be able to read it pretty quick. But we're talking about, by the way, Kendra and Aries, we had met me and Hannes joined, or Hannes has been part of it, rather. I joined the Herculean Society, which is a group run, at least this one is based out of Oxford. There's a U.S. one as well, but I ended up joining that one. And they have a conference Congress, every 2 years, where they go to the dig site in Urbano and meet up and explore the site, and also a big part of what the society does is sponsor a lot of like the restoration projects that are going on there. And so I ended up meeting Hannes there, and we met another guy there named Eric Siblin, who was writing a book, a fiction book that was focused around Herculaneum, and then also the concept of like virtual enrolling. And we talked a fair bit there, and that's how I learned about it. But yeah, Hannes, I guess, did some editing on it, and we had talked to him to kind of like maybe give him a little bit of information on like how the process looks, and it was fun. You should join the Herculean Society, by the way. It's really cool. I went. The last trip was amazing. It was really, really, really cool. We got to see some areas that like aren't open to the public yet, because the society sponsors the restoration of them. So we got to see like some of the stuff before it opened. I think all of the ones that we saw are now open, but it was really cool. Like, we had like the best tour guides on the planet. They were like the people who work there. So you get, an amazing experience touring there, and then all of the people that are in society were really cool. I had a ton of fun. And it's like, I don't think it's $100 or something a year, which, I mean, it can be a lot of money, but it pays for a lot of really good things. They also sponsor some like scholarships for people who are working on projects that are related to, I think only projects that are related to Herculaneum, but yeah, it was awesome. The membership fee does not cover the trip to Orlando, but it does get you an invite. Right, yeah, you do have to be a member. But there's no like process. It's not like a big process. Like basically, you just say you want to join, you donate, and then when the Congress sign up comes around, you just have to sign up because they have obviously a limited amount of room. But if you sign up right when they send it out, and they send out the invites pretty early, so you should probably be able to get in as long as you sign up, within a reasonable amount of time after it. They also send out a newsletter, which is really cool. It's got a lot of like kind of the latest information on what's going on with Papyri or the project, the excavation there, and things like that. And they look nice. I've got them all stacked up on my shelf. The only thing I would recommend if you go there, though, is do not try to rely on the taxi service in Orlando at 4 in the morning to get to the airport, because you might have to walk a really long ways before you can find a taxi. I had to walk from Orlando all the way through Portici, like almost to Naples before I could get a taxi at like 4 in the morning, and I almost. There goes my headset again. I almost missed my flight, but I made it. I found some like app that Italian taxis use, I guess, and I was able to find my way there through that. It was called like iTaxi or something. Oh yeah, nice. Thanks for sending the link. I think I'm gonna have to take this one for about 6 more minutes, and then I gotta go eat lunch. Yeah, that's probably true. Although I did really like it. I had my Airbnb was in such a cool place. My Airbnb was like the coolest Airbnb I've ever stayed in. I stayed in this like, I don't know, it was like this old beautiful building. It wasn't like it was a little run on the outside, but like inside it was just gorgeous. And I had this giant Airbnb all to myself, and it was so cheap. Yeah, I would really recommend going if you can. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. start with the example too, by the way. Again, kind of like something that like when you're zoomed in isn't super clear, but when you zoom out, it becomes pretty clear. This one right here. Notice this like little part, this like little shard here. And I don't really recommend like annotating zoomed out, but just to kind of like get a clear picture of things, sometimes it really helps to zoom out. And the other thing is when you zoom out in WebKnossos, one of the things that's both annoying that, the fact that you tap for more than one layer, well, the reason for that is because you're actually looking at a downsampled version. But it does have some upsides in that when you're looking at an upsampled version, you are in fact looking at a composite, because it takes 2 or 4 or whatever layers. And so sometimes you can kind of get a look at like what's actually, some of the stuff when you're looking at when you're zoomed out is actually from layers that are higher or lower. So it can help to just again just zoom out, get another look at what it is that you're actually annotating. So now the question is this the top of a tau or the bottom of an F? Definitely the top of a tau. Let's see. I've got this like, maybe I'm going to just see how that looks first. No, it looks like I can't even see. No, that's just the way it is. Okay. Yeah, this one keeps going quite a ways. Again, like I didn't, when I zoomed in, this part here in particular, like didn't look like it kept going, right? But then when I zoom out, it's pretty obvious that like this continues at least over here. This bottom part here as well. And then once you're zoomed in only for a little bit, immediately again, you're like, okay, what the heck am I annotating? This whole piece, this is a huge chunk of ink. this might actually be ink. I didn't think it was earlier, but a big chunk might actually be ink. For now, I'm just going to say it is, and maybe come back, change our mind on that a bit. And this whole edge here is the edge of a crackle. This, this, and this. Just slowly work our way this way. And then every once in a while, like I was saying before, I'll do this area here, and then I'll just shoot back over to where I was previously. I don't really like this marking anymore. I'm going to actually erase that. Way too large on the first go around, and it might be the way that it is, but it's starting to bother me because I don't see like a clear if I'm on this layer, I say okay, only this is ink, right? And then I go to the next one and I've got this giant spanning thing. Well, it has to be some kind of gradient, right? It can't just go from this tiny thing to this massive thing. So if I don't have that kind of occurring naturally, then my annotation's probably off in some way. And now my brush sleeves. Let's go down here for a sec. So that spot up there, I'm coming down here because the spot up there is kind of, I'm having a hard time seeing the borders of it right now. So I'm just gonna leave it for now. And then as I do some of this easier stuff down here, I'll start to kind of establish where my letter exists a little bit easier. And I think after we get a few of these full 3D letters like this annotated, very quickly, it's going to be more of refining what the model's predictions are than it will be actually completely doing this from scratch. Obviously, doing this from scratch for 100 letters is going to take a long time, but I don't think we need 100 letters. I think we need 50 or 75% that are annotated pretty good, and then most of the model will cover most of it, and then we'll just have to kind of figure out what it misses, and then the opposite areas that it makes mistakes in, and then it just kind of cleans up from there. I think this whole thing right here is just a huge piece of ink. All right. That's probably going to be it for me for now. I got to go eat. I'm going to put a schedule out for the rest of these maybe today. Otherwise, at some point this weekend for the ones I do next week. So I'm going to be back doing them at least a couple times a week. So thanks for coming, guys. Talk to you later.